These aren't personal decisions we're making. We're making decisions because the whole sector is shifting around us, and we need to adjust to that and change. We are in the process of bringing people back into our studios within Reflections in Newcastle. And I was there last week, and I'll be there tomorrow. And it's actually really brilliant to be working with people in a physical space. It's so exciting. It's inordinately exciting.
Hello and welcome to the Game Business Show with me, Christopher Dring. Today, we're talking to the Managing Director of Ubisoft's Reflection Studio, Lisa Opie. Lisa joined Ubisoft and the games industry, I think, back in 2021 after a career in TV and notably in various senior roles at the BBC. I've spoken to Lisa about all sorts of issues over the years, including what games can learn from TV. But more recently, we've been chatting about studio culture and diversity, the skills gap, generally managing increasingly complicated teams in an increasingly complicated and challenging industry. And frankly, she's always been a real font of wisdom and knowledge. So I've been really eager to have Lisa on the show, and I'm delighted that she's agreed to do it. So hello, Lisa. Welcome to the Game Business Show.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
We've spoken many times in the past and a few times about your time on TV with the likes of the BBC. I know it's a little while ago now. And granted, a lot of the time I'm asking that question because I'm a massive Doctor Who fan. But what have you found? But I'm interested to know, what have you found more challenging, sort of managing the shifting digital transformation that was sort of going on at TV at the time, or the sort of shifting expectations in the world of video games? You seem to have gone from frying pan into the fire.
I didn't realise I was doing that at the time. That wasn't the plan. And how have I managed it? I think to a certain extent across all of the creative sector, there is real challenge. And, some of the challenges are similar and some I think are distinctly different. Within the BBC, I was very much involved in the move of BBC in-house production becoming a commercial entity in its own right. So that challenge was about taking people who'd worked within a public service broadcaster for a long, long time, for decades, and introducing them to a commercial world, and not just a commercial world, but an increasingly digital world. In which, the dominance of streamers was becoming much more of a thing. The real commissioning power of public service broadcast and terrestrial was challenged enormously by the arrival of streamers, and the entire rights situation impacted how you operated within that world. So all of that was a challenge. It was an extraordinary challenge and one I really enjoyed, by the way. It's great fun. In comparison, I suppose, within games, I've been really struck by it too as a market is radically shifting. I happen to believe that in all radical shifts come radical opportunities too. But within the game sector, achieving cut through, being noticed, even when you've got a brilliant game, is more challenging than it was. There are big behemoths sort of eating up the top 10 in video games that tend to retain people's time, attention, and hold on to their communities. And therefore competing with that, I think, is really, really hard. And video games production is actually, software development is quite difficult too. In many ways, I'd argue quite a lot more difficult than making TV programs. People have been making TV programs in much the same way for a long, long time. But we tend to innovate in everything we do all the time in video games production. So it has some real distinctive challenges, I think.
When you made the move, was there anything that you brought with you that games wasn't maybe doing that's maybe helped you with your job, or maybe taught some of your fellow leaders, and maybe we should try doing things this way because this is how we did things before? Have you brought anything with you?
Well, you should ask them that. Has she brought any valuable thinking? Yes, I think so. I, unsurprisingly, arrived with a sort of real focus on narrative. That when I arrived, I rapidly learned that, of course, narrative, whilst being incredibly important, wasn't the be-all and end-all. And within the TV sector, because the sort of fundamental structure of a television program hasn't much changed over the decades, there has been innovation from a technology perspective, but most of the innovation is in the storytelling, the power of the storytelling. That was, I arrived with a focus on narrative that went beyond what I saw around me. And I was also, when I first came into the sector, the games that I played, Last of Us 2, completely blew me away. From a narrative perspective, I thought it was I was really surprised when I played it. It's such brilliant storytelling. So I suppose I brought a focus for narrative that for a bit I had to get my head around the fact that it's not the most important thing, Lisa. It's one of many really, really important things, but there are other things that are equally important. You can have a fantastic story, but if you don't have a fantastically compelling core loop, it really doesn't matter how good your story is. People won't stay, won't play, won't be retained. So I had to learn a lesson about putting it into perspective. But I think that's sort of my fascination for storytelling, for character, probably is one of the things that I bang on about with teams more than maybe previously people have banged on about it within the scheme of things. It's something I've always got a mind for. I also sort of arrived with a very much a sort of view that, I was really proud at studios that we delivered on time, on budget, within a sort of very tightly held constraint. And I think because video games are so iterative, because you are in, sort of building the engine and building the game and building the features all at the same time, it's much harder to innovate within video games. So whilst I brought some rigorous thinking about how you can constrain and articulate your ambition early, I also learned some lessons about how much more difficult it was to do.
I guess in TV and film and as well, by extension, you start off with quite a small group of people, like maybe a producer and a script and whatever.
Yeah.
The risk is quite low. And once you've got something there, then you can go, right, the machine can get building and then it gets much bigger and that kind of stuff. Whereas in games, you used to say you're doing all these things at the same time. You've already got a big team from the start. We are seeing that model, I guess, in some places start to shift. But when you're producing a big production on TV or film, it can start in a way that once it gets going, you can be a little bit more like it's going to hit this budget, this target, and it's going to do these things. You can be actually a little bit more exact with it.
That's exactly what I think I was pointing to. We would go through a green light process because if you're working in a drama, you've got your script writer, you've got, which everybody knows from the beginning, you know who's going to direct, you know who your producers are, you know who your cast is going to be. And then you build from that. And in that green light process, you create a mandate effectively for the production, which is really, really tight and clear. And even when you're working, because I oversaw the natural history unit, which is more akin to games in that you start with some theories about the stories that you're going to tell, but you're genuinely waiting for the animal behavior that's going to demonstrate and illustrate that story that you're hoping to tell. So it's a little bit more risky and it takes longer to create as a result. But your understanding of what you're going to deliver is really, really tight. And I think, within the game sector, that is much more challenging because the team is fundamentally bigger. The innovation happens on more axes, if you like, and therefore there's a greater complexity. But clearly, the discipline of saying, let's prove that we have a prototype which is really compelling and as tight and as small as it can be before we grow is absolutely where everybody seeks to strive. And as do we, proves that this core loop works, that this is compelling, and then build from there is the best practice, obviously.
I can't imagine what it must be like to have joined the industry at such a high point in many ways. I know it may not have necessarily been the case at Ubisoft, but certainly from an industry point of view, we're at this really super high point in terms of success and growth and all these big news and big exciting things. And then what followed was a period of consolidation and focus, just sort of decline and sort of pulling back. You've had that experience yourself over Reflections the last few months as well. That's got to have been quite a whiplash. I don't know, from somebody started at one point and then found yourself with one set of challenges and having to basically be confronted with so many others so quickly. I mean, it feels quick. I guess it's been a while now.
It's been 4 years. And you know what they say, it takes you a good 12 months to get your head around what you're doing. And in my case, it really, really did. This was an enormous learning curve for me. Best thing I've ever done, actually.
Yes.
And absolutely fascinating. And fortunately, I'm very curious. I'm very nosy. So that helped. But by the time I got my head around the new language that I needed to speak, the market in that time had shifted. And I think what I also brought when I first arrived was a real passion for what, the best thing I like doing is working with teams of people and creating cultures where people feel that they have the freedom to be creative and speak openly and bring their true selves into the workplace. All of those things, I think, were really important from day one and have sustained us, I think, across that period. Within the studios, we created and have created and still have a really constructive and respectful working environment where people feel, as I said, that they can be as creative as they like. They can have the best ideas. That's remained really important, I think, over that period of time. Even when things have been harder, it's even more important, arguably.
I don't really know how you'd answer this, but I guess when you're trying to deal with that uncertainty in the world, and you're trying to keep morale up to be that creative. You talked about your solution being people being able to be honest and be their true selves and that kind of thing. But even, when things can seem a little bit glum, maybe that true self isn't, maybe people aren't, I don't know.
And so I get your point. And I think having a clear business perspective about the realities of the sector. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. This is a sector that has been through enormous growth. Mm-hmm. Ubisoft is 40 years old next year. But you know what? In the scheme of things, that isn't, people are making theatre for a lot longer and television programs for a lot longer. This is a sector that is fully mature, that has been through extraordinary growth. I would argue there is still extraordinary growth to be had. Not all of the population plays video games. The underlying growth story, I think, and trajectory is still there. But how people play games, what they're interested in, what buys them to engage with a new IP, all of that through a period of growth when your audience, your players are growing, we've built off that, I think, really effectively. So it feels like we're going through a period of having to adjust to the market around us. I just think just a few years ago, we wouldn't have thought that there was we wouldn't have focused on that sector of casual gamers who may actually just be hooked into 10 episodes of some White Lotus or whatever it is on Netflix, and therefore don't buy that next game because they are time poor and will make a different set of choices, because actually we've still been building fans. So now we're quite mature, and those movements and shifts are the things that impact whether a game is successful or not. So I think there's a period of market adjustment. So what I'm trying to say in a long-winded and cack-handed way is, there is a maturity that we need to find within our workforce and within our approach and within our sector and business that enables us to adjust to those market shifts. In television, in commercial television and TV production, you sit quite close to the commercial road, if you see what I mean. Because you can make a lot more programs in one time. It's not, you deliver in a much tighter time scale. You have, a very much open market to go and sell your programs into. You are really commercially aware of the fundamental drivers of your business. You feel it if there is less commissioning happening from one broadcaster or one streamer above another. And in the TV sector at the moment, it's a really challenging time as a result. In the game sector, where there's much less flexible workforce, people tend to be loyal and stay within their own companies and studios. Plus video games take quite a long time to make. I think you can have a cushioning. And I think what you can see at the moment is people waking up to the fact that there are commercial challenges within our sector that are driving what is happening. These aren't personal decisions we're making. We're making decisions because the whole sector is shifting around us, and we need to adjust to that and change. It's difficult, it's challenging, but that is the reality. At the end of the day, we have to be driven by the players who buy our games.
Yeah. I mean, there's success happening out there.
Yes.
There are hits. We're writing about them every week.
Yeah, completely. Still brilliant games.
You were on a panel last year that I put together. I didn't host it, but it was around, you did a great breakdown of how different generations work, going from baby boomers all up to Gen Z. I have to say, it feels strange for you to ask you to repeat that for the listeners and viewers here. Can you? Look, it was really quite interesting to see how the challenges you've got, they all have different expectations, don't they?
Yes, they really do. So with another hat on, I'm chair of an organisation called Screen Skills, predominantly focused on television and film, but supports skills across the sector, works very, very closely with industry to make sure that we have the skills that we need, given how important the creative industries are to the UK economy and to our culture. So I do have a real interest in skills and what people bring to the table. So yes, I think it's really interesting to look at how people operate within the workforce and what they uniquely bring. And I think there's a lot of research to say, and I think, experience to say that people of different generations bring something else, and that bring something distinct to the workforce and to the workplace. And increasingly, the need to adapt to that is important for us as a business and for different businesses. I was really interested. There was a piece of research done by the Workforce Institute that looked at Gen Zs. I think they interviewed about 3,000 Gen Zs across the world, so in different countries around the world. And by the way, those are people who are aged between 13 and 28. And they asked them about their readiness for work, about what they thought they could effectively bring into the workplace and what they would be challenged to bring into the workplace. And the research is really interesting. 51% of them felt that their university education didn't actually equip them to enter the workplace, which I think is something of a worry in the first place.
Mm.
But when they talked about the challenges that they thought they would have, 1 in 4 of them felt that they would have challenges negotiating with people or having difficult conversations with people or putting their opinion. 1 in 5 said that they felt that they would have challenges being managed by somebody else or managing somebody else in a conversation. And quite a lot of them sort of expressed concern about working long hours or being asked to sort of contribute beyond your average working day into the workplace. And I just think that's really interesting. Because when I look at the skills that people bring to work, I think some of them we as an industry underestimate. Some of those soft skills that people need to deliver within the workplace, I think are some of the things that we have a tendency to overlook. We talk a lot about the hard skills that we've got or don't have, and the challenges that we have. You don't have to talk for long in the sector to know we need more people who can, focus on art or AI or come from senior producer level in order to support complex projects. But you hear less about some of those soft skills. So, I think one of the big benefits of having a workforce that stretches increasingly from sort of Gen Z through to baby boomers, who are, by the way, the sort of top from an age perspective, the extremes of those that we have within the workforce. I think all of them bring different skills into the sector. What the positives I think that Gen Zs bring is huge amounts of focus on authenticity, a great deal of respect, a demand for respect, which I think is really, really valuable, and a need to understand purpose fundamentally. It's really important to people. Whereas if you look at Gen X, for example, they prefer much more rigid frameworks around them. And Gen X are as an age between the ages of 45 and 60, they like a clear objective. They like a clear framework. They don't mind coming into the office. They don't mind being there 5 days a week. It's absolutely fine. They're probably less inclined to take a view about purpose and authenticity and respect. Not that they don't care about those things, but it may not be as front of mind. So I think, for all of us as organizations, as we're trying to manage a really diverse sector of people from all different age groups, working out how they work well together and how you make the most of them collectively is a really interesting challenge and a really good one, a really positive one.
One of my slight concerns is that I came out of university and I got a job as a journalist. I got a job at MTV magazine.
Yeah.
I had never done an interview before. I'd never even spoken on the phone in front of people before.
Yeah.
These are all things that you have to do in a newsroom.
Yeah.
And it was terrifying. But the good news is I joined this company and they said, right, I need you to call up 10 retailers and find out how much games costs.
Yeah.
They need you to email all these PRs. You need to do all these sort of very, very basic, simple jobs. And I was being taught how to do it. University didn't teach it to me. I was learning it through this process. And now we live in this world where, you've got an increasingly freelance world.
Yeah.
You've got people who are coming in and there's not necessarily jobs at the big companies. They're having to perhaps be contractors. You're living in a world where there's AI that's also able to do a lot of these sort of more mundane jobs they can lift it off. And I'm sitting there hearing, we come at university and we don't have the soft skills that we need to be successful. But I'm now worried that we're entering a world where actually even the companies don't have the processes necessarily, or not the processes, but the way things are being built. Actually, it's even harder to develop those soft skills coming out of education. So I guess that puts even more pressure and more importance on those skills being developed at a university or college level.
Yeah, I think it is. So I've been a visiting professor at Newcastle University Business School, which has just been really brilliant over the course of the last year. It's been really good fun. It really is important that some of those things that are considered soft, actually, in a world where increasingly, your ability to challenge and prompt and question and align is really, really important in an AI-driven world where we all need to be mindful to sense check and think outside of the box. Those skills, I think, are really vital. The ability, as you say, to work as part of a team, to be able to take feedback or give feedback, all of those kinds of things. I think it's increasingly important that universities offer that up. We take a lot of effort in our studios and at Ubisoft to invest in training for teams to give them the skills that they need. So we run leadership courses that have been properly accredited. We run mentoring schemes. We run communities of practice across the whole industry organization that kind of brings best practice together and enables people to learn from each other. And I think it's really important that we focus on doing that within business. But I think it needs to begin in education too, without a doubt.
I know that you've been actively looking to address the skills gap situation, which is not just in the UK. What is the situation there? How are we looking in regards to that?
So I always talk about skills gaps and skills shortages, because I think skills shortages is where you haven't got enough senior producers or AI programmers or machine learning experts or art directors, animation directors. Can't find enough of those either. And they're clear gaps where you kind of go, there's an identified, recognized need, but we don't have enough people with those skills at the moment. And then you have, that's the shortages. Then you have the gaps, which is about where do we not have a focus on training as yet. Tiger did some really good research in 2024 that identified that people felt that for the most part, they had the skills that they needed. But when they were looking at gaps, management, managing teams, writing pitches, dealing with external partners, all of those sort of softer skills are areas where they feel there are gaps. So you may have people with the harder skills, but not the softer skills. So I think, there are still challenges for us as a sector. And I would argue, what brings game studios to make their games in the UK is a combination of things. It's obviously about tax relief we can offer, but it's also about the skills that we have to support the sector. We really need to make sure we continue to have really strong skills. And we absolutely do. But I think we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on those gaps and those shortages. And I think too that we don't necessarily work as collectively together as we could. We're quite a commercially sensitive sector. And unlike TV, where there's 70% of the workforce move from production company to production company, and therefore there are really defined job roles out there that people can immediately identify. Everybody knows that a researcher at one production company does pretty much the same as a researcher at another one. That isn't the same case within the game sector. We tend to be, people stay within the same organization, don't necessarily move from organization to organization as easily. And as a result, I think that we have some work to do on aligning where those gaps currently lie and how we're all going to fill them collectively. And it's one of the things that I bang on about, and I've been talking to Nick Paul at Uki about too, about how we could do that more effectively so that we continue to bring people in. Because for me, it is mad, but I think it's 44% of video games players in Europe are women. In the US, it's something like 48%. And yet, if you look at the workforce of video games production in Europe, only 24% of the workforce are women. I think that's an issue for us as a sector. And the way we're going to get more women to come and join our sector is to be clearer about what those opportunities are, to put some effort into creating those opportunities and making them transparent. So people go, I might go watch video games because it's a place for me. Whereas at the moment, I'm not sure they all do.
Are you finding, obviously we're in a different spot now as there's a lot of people out there looking for work.
Yep.
you're talking about bringing through the next generation of people, when there's an existing generation of people that are trying to also fight for those roles. But then you're talking about the diversity of the industry, which is still a vitally important thing, but there's almost been this sort of backlash to EDI or DEI. Are you experiencing challenges in these missions as a result of all that? Or is it still, do you still feel most people are very much aligned with this mission?
I'm sure that, I absolutely hear what you're saying about the fact that there are people who are available and that's difficult and challenging. But it's not always about entry level, by the way. I think it is about how you move from, intermediate to senior. It's about progression within the industry. It's having the right skills at the right level and having those right soft skills. And as I said, there are some clear gaps. And I think if we were more aligned, finding ways of filling those gaps would be a really strong thing for us to do and provide opportunity for people. Do I still think it's important? Fundamentally, I can't.
Oh, yeah.
I just think that if you want to continue to grow your industry creatively, commercially, then having authenticity in the creation of your creative product is incredibly important. And therefore, and apart from the fact that balance within the workforce is really, really important. So yeah, still important.
Clearly, I wasn't suggesting it wasn't important.
No.
I absolutely agree with you there. It was more the fact that the spotlight was so on this so long.
Yes.
For a period of time, maybe not so long, but for a period of time, it seemed quite exciting. And now the spotlight seems to, because there's other fires that need putting out and other issues and other concerns and stuff to deal with. I was just wondering if you'd encountered I don't want to say pushback. I don't think pushback is the right word, but perhaps a little bit like, yeah, we'll have to, we've got other things to deal with. But I know that from a Ubisoft point of view, and I spoke to one of your team only a few weeks ago at GDC when we talked about the accessibility initiative they were putting on there. So I know it's still a very important thing from a Ubisoft point of view. I haven't got many questions left, but you mentioned Yuki, and Yuki have obviously just done a big call for more support for UK studios from the government, basically, and it's sort of cleaning up some stuff around the tax relief that's offered there, create more jobs, and they've got this, I think it's called Time to Press Start to Growth or something equally catchy. I had a chat with Rebellion last week, and I sort of said it does feel like there's some challenges going on in the UK space. I mean, how are you feeling about it? I don't know if you how familiar with Yuki's requests, but
very familiar and support their requests.
Yeah.
It's really important. As I said, we are a really important producer. What is it? 6th largest in the world market for video games. It's a position of great strength, and it's one we really need to sustain, I would argue. I also think we have a really healthy ecosystem within the UK. So a really good mix of smaller independent studios who, are driving IP creation and innovation within the market, coupled with some really well-established studios who support a skills infrastructure, I'd say is incredibly important, who create important IP that is successful globally. And as I said, we have a really good mix of skills within the UK to support all of that. And I think, the mix of skills is supported by companies like Ubisoft, who are investing in training and development and skills to the benefit, I'd argue, of the whole sector, which I think is really important. So I think what Yuki continues to push for in terms of continued support for our sector is really important. You look too at the adjacent sectors around video games and around, we're not alone. There are lots of other sectors that require many of the same skills that we require to be successful going forward. So for me, continuing to support and invest in video games is critical and has a benefit that goes far beyond the sort of small or immediate need of video games. It has the ability to go further than that. So no, I would support absolutely what Yuki are pushing for.
I'm conscious of the time, so I thought maybe I'll ask one final, quite general question, because somebody's come in from a different world, experienced quite radical change already, and has been thinking about the future of the medium in the studios. What do you think a video game studios are going to be even looking like in, I'll keep it short window actually, in like 5 years' time. I would say 10 years' time, but I mean, I can't, 2 years' time is a challenge. How do you feel What do you think game studios will look like in 5 years?
Do you mean how they'll be structured, how they'll operate?
It's crystal ball time. I mean, where you feel the things are heading.
So we're going through an interesting time at the moment. We have, quite a few people who now work remotely, and then we are in the process of bringing people back into our studios within Reflections in Newcastle. And I was there last week, and I'll be there tomorrow. And it's actually really brilliant to be working with people in a physical space. It's so exciting. It's inordinately exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had a policy where people have come back into the office, and lots of people have. But we've put quite a bit of energy and effort into making sure that our space is organised to be as creative as possible. So, I do think the power of connecting with people will remain really, really strong. I think that when I look forward to the future, I know you're going to say, you're bound to say that given your background, but I still think that narrative, there is still opportunity for us to tell extraordinary stories and immersive stories. So I think you'll see greater diversity and breadth. And I think that games, will become more distinctive, more diverse, more potentially accessible than that they are at the moment. I don't mean that. I mean accessible in a sort of a time commitment perspective. So shorter, rich experiences rather than, that battle to retain people has to be countered by innovation. And I think some of that will be innovation in storytelling. I think we'll see greater flexibility between TV and video games. You see those skills crossing over now consistently. The TV's kind of just woken up to it. Don't tell them I said that. But I think you will see more of that. So many of the skills that you see in TV are transportable. And I think we will all begin to think differently about the skills you need to drive your career. And I think we as employers and as, screen skills need to think about how people manage their careers in an increasingly great opportunity for people, but navigating your way through those opportunities as it becomes more complex and those areas begin to converge, supporting people to navigate their careers across those opportunities is going to be really important. That was a bit of brain dump.
Yeah, well, it was a very broad question. In your defense, it's interesting you talk about the narrative thing, because one of the things that gets thrown around a lot in this industry is video games is the biggest entertainment medium in the world. It's not actually quite true. I mean, you have to cut things in a certain way for that to be true. And when it comes to ubiquity, TV is ubiquitous. Like you find somebody who doesn't watch TV and you go, I'm sorry, what? You find someone who doesn't play video games, and that's perfectly normal. I do think narrative, actually telling stories, it's what people engage with, right? Whether it's a story in a song or story in a book or story in a film, or story in a TV show. I think that's sort of really important. I think sometimes, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I looked at the Last of Us first TV show and it had way more people watch that than played the game.
Oh God, yes. I know. I had friends in TV who kind of didn't clock that it was a video game. I was kind of going, no, it really is. And how interesting it is when you've played the game and then you watch the series and go, that's not how I did that. Or I didn't manage this scene like that. Or and I sat in that car. The power of that, I think, is really exciting. And we've only just begun to play with that. I mean, Fallout, amazing success.
Yeah.
Last of Us 2, as you said. But I still think there are some imaginative ways that you can play across those mediums that we haven't quite tapped into. Ubisoft has made, obviously, some really great and is continuing to make some really brilliant TV versions. But what Last of Us 2 did, I think, was took it somewhere else. It was so authentic to the game.
Yeah.
It was really powerful.
I also think, one of the coolest things Ubisoft does, I think, in the motion pictures or TV space actually was Mythic Quest, which isn't really based on any game.
Yes, completely. It's really brilliant.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. We actually do have a panel at our event in a couple of weeks where we've got Agbo, who are the Russo brothers thing. We've got Netflix and we've got Wizards of the Coast.
Good.
Talking about some of this stuff. And they just did some cool things on Electric State. I think there's a Peppa Pig thing going on between the game and the thing. Well, it's all, I mean, this isn't overly new, but there certainly is a lot more development, a lot more investment and interest in that kind of thing.
Yeah, completely.
Sorry, Lisa, I've taken up too much of your time. Thank you so much for joining us. And good luck with handling all of the different challenges and opportunities, as you said at the beginning, that your job has.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It was good to talk to you.
That's it for today's episode of the Game Business Show. We'll be back later in the week with our news and analysis show, where we'll be looking at the latest and big stories going on in video games and some of the latest market data as well. Until then, thank you for tuning in. Biggest challenge in managing games teams today?
Dealing with immense complexity.
What's the first thing you do when you get into work in the morning?
Make a cup of coffee.
Greatest album of all time?
Oh, God. So that's a really difficult question. I'm going to be really dull and say probably a Coldplay album. I can't even think which one. But then Nina Simone's Baltimore. There you go. That would be one of my favourite albums of all time. That's a bit quirky.
If you could be the managing director of any other company, in games or otherwise, what would it be?
Pret a Manger.
Really?
There's a reason for it. I could tell you one day.
Greatest TV show of all time?
24, Planet Earth 3, I thought was incredible. Blue Planet, I thought was amazing. Adolescence was great. You'd have to shut me up.
You named 4, but none of them were Doctor Who, so we'll move on.
Sorry.
The one thing you'd recommend every games leader reads or watches?
Reads, only just because it's the last thing I read. Tomorrow, which I just thought was brilliant.